We love fire builds here, and today we're going to go through a Stabbomancer build all about big fire damage, running and gunning and killing those bad guys. Let's go. Hey, this video is actually sponsored by my streams. I am streaming today and giving away 2 copies of Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and skeleton keys for the game if you already own it. There's a little teaser key for you. If you want to come by and check that out and win a copy for your friends or yourself, please do. And there is also a skeleton key code in the comments. They're first come, first serve, so they're only one redeem. So if you do get it, let me know in the comments down below. Let's go. So what I'm doing for my Stabbomancer, and it's just my main endgame build at the moment actually, is maximizing my fire damage and almost exclusively focusing on buffing fire damage and gun damage, because 80% of the enemies that you will face in the Chaos Chamber endgame mode have red health bars or flesh, and which fire damage does extra damage to those health bars. I'm using the Stabbomancer and the Clawbringer, as the Stabbomancer is great for movement-based gun damage skills, and the Clawbringer is where the fire damage buffs come in and the elemental damages buffs that you can get from the Clawbringer. I'm also using the Storm Dragon's Judgment as my action skill, which might sound a little weird, and it is a little weird considering it does do lightning damage, but of the 4 skills in these 2 classes, it has the lowest cooldown. Cleansing Flames is the next lowest, but it's a melee skill, and we want to take advantage of enchantments that proc when we use our action skills. So something like dealing extra fire damage from dealing melee damage doesn't flow well with this build, so it gives you a little bit of flexibility with the lightning damage, plus you can still proc all of those action skills by having that cooldown as low as possible. So really you want to just spam this out, and it's not so much like a damage dealer unless you are, doing damage against something like shields, but more to proc the other effects that you can get to get that fire damage off with your gun mainly. So for my skills, I am using the Storm Dragon's Judgment. As mentioned, we've got the Wyvern Pet class feed and the Dirty Fighting class feed to give us extra crit chance. I am also mostly focusing on that fire damage. So we're using Oath of Fire. Now I've got 8 out of 5 here to give me even more fire damage because of the piece of gear that I have on here. It's giving me 3 to that skill, which is absolutely perfect. It's also increasing my damage dealt as a whole, even though it is Graveborn power, but this is the best that I have found so far because of the extra fire damage that it is giving me. I'm also buffing my elemental damage with the Clawbringer, giving me 20% elemental damage. You can pick up some of these other skills, like the action skill cooldown is important, and then these others aren't too important. This is mostly just like my secondary class for this build, even though it is technically my primary. The Stabbomancer skills is what's important here. The Arsenal gives us tons of gun and spell damage. Mostly the gun damage is what we want to focus on here, the 15%. Potent Poisons is great because of status effects. Now, because we are doing fire damage, you will be applying that fire damage status effect to things, so you can see that's the status effect, so we're getting extra damage from that, which is why that we're picking up that skill. We're also picking up this skill, so we do extra damage to things that have a status effect, because we're always applying status effects. That's just giving us straight extra damage, as well as Swift Death for moving, so when we are moving we will do extra damage compared to if we are standing still, we will do less damage. It's better to always move with this build. We want to be moving a lot and dealing as much damage as possible. Otherwise, the main skills we're picking up is Sneak Attack for the critical hit damage, and then a couple of other trailers here. Critical hits from the 1,000 cuts for damage dealt. I'm not exactly sure whether this is giving me heaps of extra damage. I'm still tinkering with this and some of the other skills here, especially like Executioner's Blade. I honestly don't think I've ever seen this proc, even though I crit all of the time, but I'm just tinkering with some of these skills. But this is where I'm kind of at for my main direction for my Stabbomancer build right at this moment. And for myth ranks here, the main myth rank skills you want to focus on are in Deadeye, you want to focus on gun damage, and then there is fire damage up here in the Archmace. They're probably the 2 main ones, and then you can spread out everything evenly or up to you. The only one to really kind of avoid is Blade Master, other than just putting points into strength for your extra crit damage. For your gear, you obviously need to have a fire gun for this build. That makes sense. I'm using a fire assault rifle as it's the best fire weapon that I found, though a fire SMG would also work, but make sure your alternative weapons are of different element types, especially a lightning, so you can melt shields if needed to. Sometimes there'll be enemies with shields and you might need to melt them down, and fire isn't too effective against shields. But your other gear, you want to focus on buffing your gun damage and fire damage. So anything that does this is absolutely perfect. Your enchantments should be following this similar line, and mostly around damage dealt or increasing fire damage when you cast your action skill. These are probably the best enchantments in the game currently, is ones that proc off an action skill, because we're getting our action skill off roughly every 20 seconds or so, and I may not spam it all the time, but if you come across like a badass or something specific you want to hit with this, you can proc it and you get all of these action skill benefits from your enchantments, and you can just melt down that enemy very quickly. Your background here that you're starting with is probably going to be the Village Idiot to increase your critical hit damage, because because as a Stabbomancer, you are going to be doing a whole lot of crits, so the more crit damage you have, the better off you'll be. And this translates to your attributes as well, because strength and dex are probably going to be your primary attributes for crit damage and crit chance, and then attunement to lower your skill cooldown so you can get that skill off very regularly and as quickly as possible. The best secondary class, you already know the answer, it's the Clawbringer for this Pyromancer build. It's the only option really because we're focusing on fire damage, which is what the Clawbringer brings to this build. And the Clawbringer focuses on fire and lightning damage, fire for range and lightning for melee. But we're focusing on the fire aspects here and just following along with the elemental damage and the fire damage that you can do. You also get the Wyvern pet as your class feat, which is pretty solid just to have a companion with you. It's especially for a solo player like myself, it's always good to have a companion to kind of back you up in scenarios where sometimes you might get, go down or something and you can't death save yourself. The companion can help you by killing something to bring yourself back up. A couple of class tips for playing this build is movement is key. You always want to be on the move to add to your damage dealt that you are putting out. Try to avoid melee as much as possible, especially in some of the harder chaos chambers when there's like effects on the ground and stuff. If you do get bad curses, that really kills me. I probably die mostly to effects on the ground from bad curses in the chaos chamber mode than actually dying to enemies, but that's a separate story. Otherwise, just deal fire damage as much as you can. Some enemies will be resistant to fire damage even if they do have a red health bar, so having those other elemental types on your weapons is always valuable. I even am carrying an assault rifle that has a really high fire rate that doesn't do any elemental damage just because it melts enemies. So as long as you've got options for if you do come across resistances, you will absolutely do really well with this build and deal tons of fire damage to the enemies, which is what we're trying to do here. Check out my endgame guide if you want some more info on the Chaos Chamber and the other endgame elements like the myth ranks. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.